so much for joining us. Let me jump straight into one or two questions that I have for us. I think the first one, Audrey, and I'm going to throw this at you. Millennials have an entitlement attitude. I thought that was kind of apparent. I've got two of them in my house, and that's one of the biggest discussions we have. You're so entitled! But this is a millennial thing. Why is it that they're getting this ongoing attention? Why do they get so much criticism around it? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think there's a major focus on millennials at the moment in the workspace, and it's because of what they bring to the table, and I think of the disruption on what we are actually used to, and then when they step into our work environment or they step into our space, then we realize the big difference. And a little bit of the background that I find very interesting is just on population numbers. If you look at the boomer generation, for example, and that's around the world, it's not just within a South African context, and you had to give a number, let's say 100, that represent the boomer generation. When you look at Gen X, then that goes down to around between 40 and 50. So Gen X is a very small generation. So when they stepped into the work environment, what they've done is they had to adapt or die. Did they agree with everything? Not necessarily, but they had to adapt to fit into it. But when the millennials step into the work environment and you had to put a number to them, it's between 120 and 140. So by population, they are a much larger generation. And because they are so different, they just said, well, we're stepping in, and it's almost like a message that came to the boomers and saying, well, adapt or die. And the Xers on the other side looked at what the millennials were saying, said, well, we don't necessarily agree with everything that the boomers were saying, but we also agree with some of the stuff that you were doing, but we also don't necessarily disagree with the millennials, but we agree with some of the stuff that you're doing, and we tend to lean more towards that. And eventually you had this mass movement of people just stepping in and saying, well, we bring forth change. And most of those criticism that came, well, in just some of the studies we've done, were coming more from a generation that experienced this change as a negative and not necessarily as a positive.
Okay, so let's talk about that positive change. The only millennial we have on the panel. I mean, how did we get that wrong, guys? So, Mabelewa, what are millennials bringing to the workplace? So we've understood the negative connotations and the bad press they're getting. What's the positive stuff? What are you guys bringing to the workplace?
I think just to double a little bit on that negative, just to answer, to make you understand, we don't often we don't look at the root cause of a situation. We're so quick to be like, yeah, this is why, this must be the reason, or just because I'm not used to it, it's clearly not. It can't be normal that that millennials are acting in one way or another. And what I noticed amongst my peers and myself is that we have a good sense of entrepreneurship. We're very innovative, and we're not scared to take risks in terms of our wealth and monetary risks. We're really in the mindset that nothing can really affect our flow as long as we're happy. And a lot of people, excuse the happiness part of things because, if you're not making money, how can you be happy? And if you're not sort of moving forward in the light of other people, how can you be happy? But if I'm moving at my own pace and I'm happy with that, then for me, and for you, you should be happy with that too. You know what I mean? And I think in the workplace...
So you're saying that's what millennials are thinking?
I think
my time, my pace, if you're not happy with that, I'll get a job elsewhere. Help me understand that. Is that really what you're saying?
So yes,
Wow.
Yes I am. Quite frankly, it is...
Okay.
Quite frankly.
Yeah. Okay.
Mainly because there's so many social constructs, and for me to constantly be thinking, oh, what is my boss thinking? What are my parents thinking? What are my friends thinking? And how do I make that into what? And then what am I thinking? I still have to make space for that too. And at the end of the day, you just look at all of these things that you have to think about, and you're like, let me just put a chair and then continue, and I know I'm still going to be fine.
Yeah.
If I'm thinking about my happiness, and at the end of the day, I'm going to be okay. And And
So I'm just reflecting back to you. That
Yes.
sounds very entitled to this Generation X. So,
of course, it will.
and you agree. Okay, well, that's amazing. I mean,
Of
these
course
millennials,
it
just
will.
say it like it is. Doc, jump in here and bail me out a little bit. I mean, tell me your understanding. I mean, what can we learn from the millennials? Because I got to tell you, Mom, I love that confidence. I love the fact that you're just saying, guys, in my time, my happiness, I might not agree with that, but that's your stance. So what can we learn from these guys?
Well, I do think, I mean, on a very, is this thing on?
Now it is, yes.
I do think from a very a practical perspective, there's a lot that we can learn from millennials, right? I mean, it's like she's saying, they bring with them new ways of doing things. From where we used to, I don't know, where we used to go into shops, so you want to insist on going to shops, they decide to go take things more technologically savvy and go online and find simpler ways of doing things. So I think that there are those very sort of practical things to learn. But I just wanted to touch on some of those other things that you were mentioning. When I learned something at the back, because we were talking about this entitlement, right? And I learned something. It was great. We had a great conversation at the back. So I'm just going to steal what you actually told me. It was really useful because you spoke about how there's a difference between youth difference and generational difference. And I think, and what you were saying, and I thought was really insightful, was that we sometimes mistake differences between the older population and the youth for generational gaps. So that's the one thing, and maybe that's where, so for example, if I have a teenage child, they would seem entitled, but that's not necessarily a millennial speaking. Yeah. So I thought that was really helpful in terms of understanding those nuances, and I thought with and also another thing, I think there's this huge expectation, right, of what millennials should be doing, because it's so much easier for them now, but actually it's not. I mean, I think, yes, with these technological advances come perceived easier way of doing things, but it's become much more complex, and with that complexity comes difficulty, and so I think we need to cut millennials some slack.
I think you're right, Judy. I think our worldview impacts our generational perspective. So my mom still has canned tuna in a fridge that expired in 1998, but she'll never throw food away. My kids just throw food into the bin. They're done, and guys, there are people starving in wherever, Syria, Ethiopia, and the typical comment from millennials is, well, let's send the food to them then. It's a kind of, so in that sense, it's we can learn from that. It's our worldviews that change, that do create that generational divide. Let's talk about some other divides. So there's generational. What about gender divides, particularly amongst millennials? I think you've done a bit of work on that, Doc, haven't you?
We did do a little bit of work on it. I mean, I think, it's really complex to be speaking about sort of a very generalized group. I think gender divides, in the South African context, we're such a complex nation. I mean, we've done a study where we looked at, we called it Exploring Generation Y, and we found quite a lot of difference, not as much amongst gender, actually. In fact, it was much more amongst racial divides and much more amongst LSM, and those sorts of things were the things that actually divided the perceptions of the worldviews of the various population groups.
Do you want to comment on that, Mamlewa? I mean, kind of racial differences within millennials, does that come into play as well?
Racial differences, just
in terms
to
of
clarify.
how you see that divide. So we've talked about generational divides, the boomers are not understanding the X's of, what about bringing
Amongst
race into
us.
that as well? Yeah. And how are South African millennials different from European millennials, for example?
It's very important to also note that we are a unique country, considering how diverse we are. I mean, in this country, we host so many different types of cultural backgrounds and race, languages, and I think amongst us, we tend to be quite shy to confront the obvious, if I may say. Okay. So I think amongst our respective races, for instance, I think our biggest problem is that we talk about race amongst our own races, and so a white person will talk about black people with white people, and black people will talk about white people with black people. So where are we going if we're not talking about it with each other? And I think it's very important. It's very important to collaborate those ideas, and in as much as whatever you will say might offend me, and maybe you will be called a racist, you must be ready for that, because we're at we need to start breaking barriers. We need to be sort of comfortable with the idea with the idea of being uncomfortable, because if we don't confront those insecurities that we have as a nation and as millennials, and including race, and then we'll never get anywhere, because the message is constantly being streamlined into areas where it sort of ends, but there's no sort of results in the.
Let me ask you this
Yeah.
tricky question. Would you feel closer to a millennial, a white millennial, than you would to a black boomer or black Xer, for example? In other words, your generational ties are almost closer than, generational ties are closer than kind of racial ties. Would you agree with that?
Yes, mainly because, well, we're going through the same things. If you don't look at the color of our skin. And there was a stage in my life when I didn't have to look at the color of my skin, but then I left high school and everyone was telling me, oh, but you black, and oh, and she's white, and you know what I mean? And you're constantly being reminded about your skin color. Then you're like, oh yeah, by the way, I actually am black, and now I have to think, oh wait, I can get a job, but I'm black because you know, and everything then becomes about your skin color. And in actual fact, I wasn't thinking that way. It was what I was hearing, and. Shamefully enough, from my parents, from my uncles, from my aunts, from, you know, the adults of my white peers as well. You hear it from them. We weren't, so I do honestly feel connected with my white counterparts who are of the same age as me, on other levels, like how well am I at snapping, and how well, you know, and am I getting through this adulting thing, and you know, we have the same challenges, and it's not really about race in the end. Okay. So, yeah.
Well, no, that's great. I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to throw at the panel. And guys, if that comes up, Audra, maybe you want to grab that one as well. What does the panel think they can teach millennials, and what's the millennial response to their comments? I mean, is that something we want to talk to? What can we teach millennials? I'm not sure that's... No. I think we're kind of learning from them. Is it?
If I can just comment on that. I think one thing that's really coming to the forefront for us is not as much as what can millennials learn from other generations or other generations learn from millennials, but it's about an attitude on how can we learn together. And collectively, between generations, tackle a similar issue, and we might look at it at different angles, but because we look at it at different angles, we are actually producing a much better product.
Great answer, Audrey. I want to make a comment on this question, and from Anonymous, but it's been flagged a couple of times in Slido. As a millennial sitting in the audience, I disagree with the idea of as long as I'm happy. We're entrepreneurs and we're trailblazers, and I think what you're referring to, Anonymous, is the fact that for millennials, meaning and purpose is valuable. You know, in the work that I do, I need to have meaning. If I can't find meaning in this, I'm not going to stick around. And maybe that's a better way of describing what you're trying to say is as long as I'm happy, it's really as long as there's a sense of meaning and purpose. Would you agree? Brilliant. Thanks for that comment, by the way. That was awesome.
Just add to that,
Yeah,
you know, we did do the study that we did at Brand South Africa that was part of our domestic perception survey. So the survey basically, it's an annual survey we do regularly, and we gauge perceptions of South Africans as of their country, of themselves, of each other, of where they think the country's going. But we also try to sort of, you know, we break them down into various population groups. So we break them down into age groups, and we break them down into LSMs and all of those other various factors. And with the Generation Y, we found exactly that. We found that people, it does actually comply with the sort of international standard and the norm of understanding what a millennial looks for in a job is not recognition but self-satisfaction. And similarly, that study showed it very clearly that the millennial professionals do not seek out a job for the salary, they seek out the job for meaning. So that was really quite nice to see, because that, I think, is something that we can definitely learn. If we're going to learn something, that's something
Absolutely,
I think we should be learning from.
That's a noble quality to have. Here's a great question. Any suggestions on not necessarily how we can prevent conflict between generations? Because there is differences. We understand that. We won't see eye to eye because of generational differences. So how do we avoid that conflict? How do we work together? To come back to what you were saying.
Well, first of all, I think we need to talk more together. We need to create opportunities and
talk,
space.
But these guys don't talk. These are all the whole time. Just So
well, that's
WhatsApp
one way
together
of
is what you're saying.
That's
I'm
one way
with
of
you
talking. But I think there needs to be more intentional space where generations can sit around the same table and talk about issues and real issues that each of them are facing. It's not about creating the specific formula. And I think what you briefly touched on it when it comes to behavior patterns is at the end of the day, behavior is just an outflow of worldview. And through our worldview, it shapes our belief system, that shapes our value systems, and then eventually determines our behavior. And each generation's got a different worldview because of the way they've grown up, the things that they've experienced, and that helps to shape different belief systems, and that eventually create different values. But when we sit together and we look at the elephant from the different angles, each of us might see a different element of the elephant, but at the end of the day, we're still describing the same issue. And we can bring different solutions to the table. And so the more time, and I want to say this, intentional time we create to communicate between generations, the more effectively we will be.
Brilliant. Again, great answer. Mamolelo, answer this question for me. It's a respect question. So the silent generation came out of the war. They saved everything. They were, frugal. They demand respect. Okay. Gen Xers don't know what respect is, generally. What about millennials? How do you see respect? Do we need to earn your respect, or is there a point where you naturally give respect? How do you see respect?
I think that with millennials, if I'm getting respect, I'm naturally going to give it. And I hope this doesn't sound too crude or too crass, but our BS level, our BS meter it's like high. We can tell when you are not being genuine. It's so and we're out to get you. We're out. We can tell when you're just trying to meet your bottom line.
So what am I doing to your BS radar at the moment? That's what I want to know. Does she see right through me? I wonder.
So basically, considering how high and our BS radar is, if I can tell that your respect is ingenuine, I'm going to give you the same kind of respect, and I'm going to expect you to expect that. I'm not in obviously a tit for tat kind of way, but you can't expect me to go all the way, and you only meet me about a quarter of the way. I can't look at you in the same way. If you know what I mean. Yeah. So I think it's mainly about, am I getting as much as I'm receiving? And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's because we're constantly having to judge things and on technology and from what people are saying, information overload, with the conversation that we had in the back. We have to cut things as soon as they start. So if I notice that you're being ingenuine with me right now, I'm gonna move on with my life and sort of find respect elsewhere. And same goes, I think, with an employer. If I'm not feeling respected in the workplace, I'm going to respect you to a point where, okay, my salary is okay now. Okay, actually, I can find the salary elsewhere. And so I'm going to leave, naturally.
Okay. Well, thank you for sticking around and not leaving. That's guys, we are talking millennials, so let's wrap up. And again, time's not on our side. Judy, we're tweeting. So you have 160 characters. What's your, no more? What is it? It's not 280. I really blew that one, didn't I? Yeah, that's.
No, I don't know. I'm a terrible tweeter.
Well, give me the one sentence.
Ages.
Give me the tweet that you would leave with us when it comes to millennials. What's the one thing you want us to know and walk away with today? And I'm going to ask the same question to.
I think that, well, if you look at South African millennials, as Mamolewa's statement before, we see that they are an empowered generation, and I think it's fantastic because I think we can all learn from that sense of empowerment, not entitlement. It's empowerment that we should be focusing on, that we can, especially in the South African context, coming from all this political turmoil and all this insecurity that created so much insecurity in ourselves. That is not 160 characters. I'm aware of that, but I'm a very fast talker. Yeah. So I hope
it's a voice note. It's a WhatsApp voice note. There we go. It's a 12-second vine. There we are.
Anyway, so I think that I think it's fantastic. I'm really inspired by the zeal and the fervor with which millennials have tackled the challenges that we face in our country. So I look forward to learning and sharing with them as Brand South Africa.
We're going to leave you for last, Mamolelo. Adrian, what's your tweet?
Well, this will not just go for millennials, but also for Gen Zs that are the generation following. And the tweet would be, young people requires coaches and not bosses.
Wow. He's a lot of tweetable things today, Adrian. Thank you. Well done.
beat that, man. Yeah. Yeah. We should have ended with Adrian.
Be careful, she might just walk off now.
This is true, yeah. Well, Yeah. With bated breath.
I don't know if this is going to be tweet character long, but I just wanted to touch on our questionable loyalty, considering that a lot of people say that that the millennials have a lifespan of about 2 years maximum in the workplace. I just wanted to leave everybody with a food for thought that it's so easy to say that it's so easy to lean on the crutch that we're entitled and that we're constantly, we're unsociable or that we're lazy. And I think in terms of the loyalty side of things, if you look at baby boomers, they went to college, got their degree, went to work, stayed at a company for 40 years, and they knew they were going to get this great pension, and they knew their package was amazing. Whereas today, if we fast forward to today, you go to work and all those things are actually gone. And so if the things that were supposed to keep me loyal are not there, how am I supposed to stay loyal? So it's very important to know that if you want to keep a millennial in your workspace, you need to be ready to give me the intangible things. And I'm not talking the salary, obviously, anything that basically beats your competitor, because everyone has salary. Everyone is going to, might offer a good work environment, but if you can offer those intangible things that are going to make me want to stay, that are going to make me want to be loyal to you, and even if I stay for 5 years, that's already a good thing. So just a plea to companies and employers out there to think about those intangible things that you're offering your employees, and not just millennials, your staff. I'm sure everyone feels a little bit undermined when they're constantly putting their back into something and getting almost nothing out of it.
So if I can put that into a tweetable form for you, would you be saying the following? If you can offer me no security, all I can rely on is me Inc. That's why I'm the center of my world. Don't know. Would that be tweetable? Am I trying to be millennial? Probably not. Guys, why don't you give our panel a big round of applause? Thank you so very much. Thank you, Adrian. Thanks, Marveleva. Thanks, Doc. Sure. What are you going to remember from